Hello and welcome to Under the Skin. This week we are in Edinburgh, where we'll peel back the layers of medical history and learn how mental illnesses were treated in the late 1800s. But first we'll start here at the McEwen Hall, where we will explore the pioneering efforts to work in real human bodies and learn about anatomy. The Murder Act of 1752 stated that only the corpses of executed murderers could be used for dissection. However, by the early 1800s, the number of anatomy students was on the rise, while the number of executions had dwindled. This caused a problem of supply. Early Western medicine was based on cause and effect. In order to understand where the illness came from and how to treat it, scientists needed to open up human bodies.
The anatomists were not liked. They were always hanging around the bottom of the gallows, ready to receive the body as it came down from the gallows. And it was always a bit of a battle between the family of the person who had been hanged and the anatomists, because they had this perception that the body would never be at peace if it wasn't buried intact. Dr. Knox took over the running of the extramural school of anatomy, and he was an extremely popular teacher. They reckon at his height, Knox had 504 students attending his classes, and he had to run 3 classes a day just to get through the numbers, and consequently he had a big demand on bodies.
The lack of cadavers was remedied by the emergence of the so-called body snatchers, or resurrectionists, who dug up bodies from fresh graves in exchange for money. The scale of their activities can be illustrated by the 1831 confessions of the London Burkers, who sold more than 1,000 bodies over a 12-year period to anatomists. In Edinburgh, the infamous William Burke and William Hare gained their cadavers another way, through murder.
Burke took a common-law wife, Helen MacDougall, and together they took lodgings in Logg's lodging house, which was in the West Port, run by a Mrs. Logg and a Mr. Hare. One of their lodgers, an old man, died, owing Logg and Hare a week's rent. The solution to this financial problem was to sell his body to the anatomists.
So they went in past Surgeon Square with the body. They received £7 10 shillings, which is a lot of money in those days, for this body. And in fact, Dr. Knox, not directly but through one of his assistants, said that he would be happy to see Burke and Hare under like circumstance in the future. So what they started doing thereafter was to meet up with people who would come into Edinburgh, apply them with drink, and then take them back to Hare's lodging house where they murdered them. They used a method called burking. We used to pinch off the nostrils and hold up the jaw. As the other one or either of them would do that, whilst the other one would lie across the body to stop them struggling. And of course this left no marks on the body, and so when the body got taken up to Dr. Knox's medical school, he had no suspicions at all.
They murdered, it is thought, something like 16 people, including a quite well-known figure in the Grassmarket, Daft Jamie, and when he disappeared, questions began to be asked. They were found out by a body which was left in the lodging house and had not yet been delivered to Knox. At least this is the official story. An unofficial story is that they murdered a well-known Edinburgh prostitute, and when she appeared on the dissection table the next morning, she was recognised by every medical student in the room.
Burke got arrested. Well, they both got arrested, in fact, and so did the wives. They had not enough evidence. They only had circumstantial evidence, and so they persuaded Hare to give evidence against Burke.
The case against Burke was proved, and he was sentenced to be publicly hanged and then, very appropriately in his case, publicly dissected. Burke's skeleton remains to this day in the Anatomy Museum in the University of Edinburgh.
The legacy of Burke and Hare was the introduction of the Anatomy Act of 1832. And what they came up with was that the anatomists could get unclaimed bodies of individuals who maybe have died in prison, died in asylums, or died in the poorhouse. And next of kin were given 48 hours to claim the body, otherwise the anatomist could have them.
And so the business of robbing graves and murder for bodies for dissection came to an abrupt halt. The whole infamous business came to an end.
Well, there was a great deal of stigma in the 19th century about mental illness, and I think there's still stigma in our day. I think it's less, but it's certainly still there. And it was really only at the end of the 19th century that a classification came in that most people accepted, and that was the classification that divided the psychosis into what we call schizophrenia and manic depressive illness or bipolar disorder.
In general, I suppose I would feel that people who were displaying extreme behaviours would probably find themselves in an asylum for the protection of the public, much more than for decent treatment.
Through hale and healthy wad they pass the day, at night in calmest slumbers does foo sound, nor doctor need their weary life to spay, nor drugs their noodle and their sense confound, till death slips sleely on and gie the hindmost wound.
These were the words of Robert Ferguson, Edinburgh's influential but unsung 18th century poet. In his youth, Ferguson received a violent blow to the head from falling down a flight of stairs. The blow aggravated symptoms of a mental illness which had begun to manifest itself. His mother's attempts to care for him failed, and he was transferred to Edinburgh's Bedlam Madhouse, then the only public asylum in Edinburgh. Ferguson died, incarcerated, in 1774.
People speculated on why he died, and I've looked at this myself. It's very difficult to know why he died. His plight, though, did illustrate that if you were not particularly well off in Edinburgh and mentally ill, there was very little provision for you. If you were poor, there was just the city bedlam, which really wasn't very satisfactory. So there was a view that it was better to try something than to do nothing. And what was tried was a lobotomy, which was an operation which severed brain fibres in the front of the brain, the frontal lobe, which basically means going through the back of the eye, the orbital fossa, with a knife, because that way you can reach the frontal lobes and you can sever the fibres. And it's easy to write about people doing this as complete and utter villains, and undoubtedly thousands of patients were mutilated by these operations, but I think we have to have some balance and say people were motivated by a desire to help people, to get them out of hospital. But I think they ignored the first dictum that doctors are taught, which is first do no harm, and they did a great deal of harm.
Fortunately today, conditions are better, and we deal with mental illness mainly through therapy and medication. Thank you for joining us tonight on Under the Skin. If the items you've seen have piqued your interest, log on to our website at undertheskin.co.uk. Next week, we travel to the streets of Victorian London to explore the experiments done to test the effects of penicillin, and we ask, how justified were the controversial methods employed by Dr. William Gull? See you next week on Under the Skin.